Hello biologists, welcome back to Bioscience. This lecture is all about cells. Cells, I really like cells. My graduate degree is in cell and molecular biology, which is just looking at pictures of microscopes and talking about DNA and stuff, but cells are so cool. Cells are really, really cool, I think, because cells are the tiniest living thing. Like the tiniest thing that we consider alive is a cell. So this is the tiniest living things. I think that's so cool. All living things to that end then are made of cells. So all living things are made of cells. One cell, like a bacteria, it's just one cell, or many cells like you or me with millions of cells. And all cells actually come from other cells. That's called cell division. That cell division, there's some special processes involved there, but you can't just get any cell, poof, not like that. All cells come from other cells, and I think that's so cool. The tiniest living thing does this, the cell. And so here, let's have a history lesson. Evolutionary history, just a quick one. This is a very simplified story of events, a very simplified version. So in a long time ago, and a long time ago, I mean like 4 billion years ago, a long time ago. So 4 billion years ago. 4 billion years ago in the ocean next to some really hot like lava vents and things like that, some molecules came together and they formed a cell. That's really cool. That's this point here, cell. And from that cell, then that cell kind of got a little bit different. And so this common ancestor of the first cell kind of diverged here. So I have one branch, another branch, and then like another branch there. And all of these little points that I'm drawing here, those are like where that common ancestor, that cell then kind of changed a little bit. And that cell kind of changed a little bit into 3 main families. So you can, like that one cell from 4 billion years ago, next to those hot lava vents, some of those became bacteria. Some of those became these cells called archaea. Archaea are like these really simple unicellular things, similar to bacteria but different. And then lastly also came eukaryotes. And these are all different cells/organisms. And so what we see here in our history lesson, what we've drawn here, I'll circle in red, these guys, bacteria and archaea, are these guys that we call prokaryotes. Prokaryotes tend to be single-celled things. Simple, unicellular, those guys. Eukaryotes, though, on the other hand, I'll circle in green. Eukaryotes include things like plants, like fungi, like animals. So those are eukaryotes, these 2 main groups, prokaryotes, eukaryotes. All of this came from this one common guy, cell. And then we have some cells that are bacteria, and now some cells that are archaea, and then some multicellular stuff. Eukaryotes, there are single-celled eukaryotes, but things like plants and like fungi and like animals, that's really cool, all from way back in the day, that one guy, the cell. So that's our history lesson. But let's talk a little bit more about those differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So let's go. So maybe I'll just keep it the same color. I think that sounds fun. So I'll draw a line down the middle here. That's close enough to the middle, I think. Okay, so we'll do prokaryotes in red. And we'll do eukaryotes in green. And eukaryotes. So prokaryotes are stuff that we would call unicellular. Unicellular. Unicellular things, organisms, are only one cell. Uni means one, cellular means cell, so one cell. Eukaryotes, though, on the other hand, they can be either unicellular or multicellular. Multicellular. Something that's multicellular is like anything you could think of, like us, like a plant, like a mushroom, multicellular stuff. But eukaryotes can also be unicellular, like an example is amoeba. Those little amoebas that you're not supposed to get when you go swim in fresh water. You know, amoebas. So another difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes is where their DNA lives. So in prokaryotes, they're just like this unicellular blob. And that unicellular cell, that blob, has its DNA just like kind of floating in the wind. DNA, not in the wind, in the liquid inside of the cell. DNA is floating around. Around in what we call the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm. That's the liquid inside of the cell. So that DNA is just kind of floating around in that goo inside of the cell versus eukaryotes. The difference is the DNA, it has a house. The DNA, it has a house, and that house is called the nucleus. So the DNA stays inside the nucleus. The nucleus is something called an organelle that stores that DNA. So the nucleus is the DNA storage guy. That's the guy, the nucleus. And just so you know, organelles. So nucleus is an organelle. Organelles have lots of different jobs, which we'll get into in just a minute, but organelles are just any structure inside of a cell that has a membrane. So organelles are any structure inside of a cell that stores DNA. Oops, not stores DNA. That has a membrane, silly me. That has a membrane. Has a membrane. That has a membrane. So that's organelles. A nucleus is one example of an organelle. Okay. Versus, well, a prokaryote, they don't have organelles. So, no organelles. Eukaryotes, organelles aplenty though. More on that DNA piece in prokaryotes, that DNA is circular. So if we were to zoom in on DNA, like really, really zoom in, what you'd see is kind of like this, we call it a double helix structure, like that. So that's DNA. But what DNA looks like in prokaryotes is that DNA, that double helix shape, it goes all the way around. It's like this continuous thing. Okay, so pretend that I've really drawn this circle, like really like this, like that double helix, and then there's that other strand there, that double strand, or a prettier version of that. You know, it's like a circle. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so moving forward, so in eukaryotes, the DNA, instead of being in this circle, it's actually just in many pieces. And those pieces are called chromosomes. And every organelle, or every organism rather, has a certain number of chromosomes. Humans, for example, have 23 pairs of chromosomes for a total of 46. So that's prokaryotes and eukaryotes. There's one more difference here in the shape of DNA, and that last difference is that instead of DNA being circular in eukaryotes, it's actually linear shape. So it's not in a circle, it's not all continuous, it's different bits called chromosomes in this linear shape. All right, one last difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes I want to talk about, and that is the presence of ribosomes. Both have these guys, ribosomes. Ribosomes, they're little dots inside of the cell that make proteins, and in prokaryotes, they're really small. So ribosomes, they're small. Those small ribosomes, they're where proteins are made. All right, that's ribosomes. In prokaryotes and in eukaryotes, ribosomes still make proteins. They still make proteins. Where proteins are made. Where proteins are made. But they're bigger. And the thing about proteins, we already talked about proteins a little bit, but proteins are really, really important for doing stuff in the cell. They're enzymes to catalyze chemical reactions, meaning that they're going to make them happen more often. Proteins are just the stuff of our cell that do the things that we need to do. Okay, so that's the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So I think then the question is, what do our cells look like? What do our cells look like? So I'll write that. That's our next page here. What do our cells look like? What do our cells look like? What do our cells look like? Our cells look like, well, we're animals. Humans are part of that animal thing. So this is a eukaryotic animal cell. Let me show you a picture generally of what an animal cell looks like. So generally an animal cell looks something like this. Generally an animal cell looks something like this. And so animal cells are pretty cool. They have a lot of parts to them, and a lot of these parts are already labeled for us, which is kind of nice. This big purple guy here, notice that big purple guy has like a bunch of like DNA looking spaghetti in there. Yeah, that's the nucleus. So that's this guy here, that's the nucleus. The nucleus, that's where DNA lives. That houses DNA. Houses DNA. So the nucleus houses DNA, but there's also like this stuff, these like folds coming off of that nucleus. That's called the endoplasmic reticulum. So that's this guy here. So that's this label. I'm tracking this label here. Boop, boop. That's the endoplasmic reticulum. Endoplasmic reticulum. We actually call it the ER, endoplasmic reticulum. We actually have two different types of endoplasmic reticulum in the cell. We have a smooth one and we have a rough one. The one that looks rough, that's why it's called rough, because it has all this red stuff on it. That's what we're pointing to. So this is the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And rough endoplasmic reticulum is called rough because when you look at it on a microscope, it looks rough. And it looks rough because, like I said, of all this red stuff here and all those little red dots there on the outside, those are ribosomes. And so ribosomes, the rough part is because of ribosomes. So the rough endoplasmic reticulum and ribosomes, well, they work together to do proteins because if we go back to our previous page, we just discussed that ribosomes, that's where proteins are made. So that makes sense. Rough endoplasmic reticulum plays a role in protein stuff because, well, it has ribosomes on it, and that's what ribosomes do, is proteins. But we also have a smooth type of endoplasmic reticulum. And that's this guy here, all of this smooth stuff. That's called the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. So that's smooth ER. And smooth ER is really cool because that's where we make lipids. And remember that our whole like cell membrane and all the way around like our nucleus, all of these organelles here are membranes which are made up a lot of lipids, phospholipids, right? And so the smooth ER makes lipids. And that's really important for things like cell membrane and other important things. We had a video about lipids already so far this semester. So lipids are really important. Another thing that's here is this guy called the Golgi apparatus. So that's this guy here. This pink that it's depicted in, or orange or whatever color that is, that's called the Golgi complex or Golgi apparatus. And the Golgi is really cool because it kind of plays this role in like fixing proteins, making them just right for their specific function. So that's where proteins are fixed or modified. Where proteins are fixed or modified. And then the Golgi sends that protein where it needs to go, outside of the cell, within the cell, etc. It's kind of like Amazon Prime. So that's the Golgi. And then lastly, we have that's depicted here is the mitochondria. That's this orange guy here. You can tell it's the mitochondria because it kind of looks like this like jelly bean situation with these little legs that point inside. So that's the mitochondria. Mitochondria. And the mitochondria have been a meme for as long as I remember. The mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. And what that means, mitochondria being powerhouses of the cell, mitochondria actually make all of the energy that we need. That's where cellular energy is generated. Where cellular energy is generated. And that cellular energy is called ATP. So that's mitochondria, where cellular energy is generated, ATP. That's why we can say mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell, because all that energy that we need comes from those mitochondria by and large. And we actually get that energy, ATP, which is what we need to do everything. All of the stuff we need to do is from ATP. We get it from the food that we eat. So that's from food that we eat. Okay, and there's a couple of other things that I haven't mentioned here. All of this like stuff going on here, all these sticks, all those sticks are like cytoskeletons. I'll kind of write it over here. Oops, okay, I'll just write cytoskeleton over here, cytoskeleton. That's bits of proteins that are important for transport and structure. Like it's the skeleton of the cell. So transport and structure. And then you see these little dots here, boop, 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 boop. All those dots are what we call free ribosomes. Free ribosomes are not like, oh, they're free, they cost no money, they just hang out. They hang out. So these guys, these little red dots here, those are called free ribosomes. So they're ribosomes that just hang out in that cytoplasm, that goo liquid inside of the cell to make proteins. That's what they do. That's their job. So that's animal cell. Animal cells have a lot going on. It's really cool, and they do a lot of really important stuff. So that's our cells. But there's also another type of cell I haven't talked about yet, and that's a plant cell. So let's take a look at one of those. So this is animal cell, what we're looking at here. That's the type of cells that we have. But moving on into our next page, and this is our last page before I let you go. The last thing, this is a plant cell. And a plant cell is cool because, a plant cell is really cool because it has all the same stuff. Oh boy, let me start over here. Okay, here we go. A plant cell is really cool because it has all the same stuff that our cells do. So plant cells but it has 3 extra things that we're going to talk about. So everything in animal cells plus some other stuff. So some of that other stuff is this thing called cell wall. That's this outer thing here. Like all of this dark green around the cell, that's called cell wall. So, all right, cell wall. And cell wall is just, it has a bunch of cellulose. If you remember, cellulose is a carbohydrate that's just a bunch of glucoses. And that's cellulose for structure. Cellulose for structure. And then this big old thing, it's actually a big old water bubble. And that big old water bubble we call a central vacuole. So that big old water bubble is called a central vacuole. And that central vacuole has water and like some other stuff, but mostly water. And that helps hold up and give that plant a little bit of structure. So when that plant is kind of more dry, that central vacuole is a little like squishier, and that's why your plants get kind of droopy. So that central vacuole is really important for helping that plant stand up. And then the last thing here is this little green jelly bean. That little green jelly bean is a really important guy called chloroplast. Chloroplast. The chloroplast is really cool because this is the site of photosynthesis. That's the type of energy making that plant cells do. That's the site of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is taking light from the sun. So here's my sun. I should have drawn this in a darker pen. There we go, light from the sun. Boop, boop, boop. So that sun, those rays from the sun come on down. And then here's my plant here on the ground. And maybe it's a green little flower thing. I don't know. And what happens, those chloroplasts, they take in that light energy. And they use it to make food. So that's light. Light energy that transforms into food. This really cool thing that plants do is actually where all of everything comes from, really, because plants are the base of all food. We call it the base of the food chain because everything you eat, all those organisms you eat, they all come from plants. That's pretty cool. Oh, and I forgot to mention, plant cells, those are also eukaryotes. Let me start that over. Eukaryotes. All right, that's it. We made it. We're through this video. I'll see you next time.